So thank you for coming tonight because we want to tell you about Homer New Life Church of Faith, and we want to tell you about how God has taken us, our church history, where we started and where we're at, and we might even get into a little bit about where we may be going to, depending on what, again, we're just kind of waiting on God to give us the next steps on things. But thank you for coming tonight to find out more about our church. Has anybody got any questions about me before we get into this part of it? Good. So I want to talk about what God has done for Homer New Life Church of Faith. The second Sunday of April of 2004, actually a couple months before that, we had several people, being from Homer, we still lived in Homer, we traveled to Danville to church, but we had some friends in Homer that were part of ministries in Homer that said there was nobody, which understandably so for some, for reasons of attendance, there was nobody that hosted a Sunday night service. And we had some people and friends and acquaintances, and as our girls got to school and so forth, that we really liked something, to go to and something to have to go to on a Sunday night. So we began to pray, Debbie and I began to pray on this, and we felt like, okay, one thing we can do and still be a part of New Life Church of Faith Danville is we could do a Sunday night ministry, and we could have a praise and worship and preaching time on Sunday nights, not compete with any of the churches, not even thinking about planning a church, just being something to fill a need and a void that's at Homer. And so we felt led to do that, and the second Sunday of April of 2004, can't remember the exact date, just know it was the second Sunday of April, because we wanted to wait past Easter time. We got in touch with Dr. Hall at Heritage Schools, and he allowed us to rent the cafeteria for $15 a week. And we had every Sunday evening or afternoon about 4 o'clock, because we usually got done at Danville New Life about 2:30, got home in time to eat lunch about 3, sat down for about 3 to maybe 4, and then we were at the cafeteria setting up for 6 o'clock service. And every Sunday we were tearing down tables and chairs and setting tables and chairs back at the cafeteria, tables and chairs up. We organized it to make it look like a church. Excuse me. And having church. So we started that, and we went in April and May, and we continued to go forth. But a funny thing was happening. The people that requested us to do this weren't showing up. The people that were coming were unchurched or did not have a church affiliation. And we were like, well, this is strange, because we were expecting church folk to come in, because that's what we were requested, if you will, to do and felt led to do. So we just continue on having Sunday night service and continued, in that fashion. Still very content at Danville New Life Church of Faith. Had no thoughts of leaving or doing anything else. And about July of that year, we had a few. Some of you are sitting here tonight. They came to Sister Greer and I and said, when are we going to start a church? And the response out of my mouth was, you got the wrong guy. I'm happy at Danville New Life Church of Faith. I don't plan to be a pastor. Don't want to be a pastor. I'm fine as being an associate at Danville. Sister Greer is a minister of music at Danville. We are happy, happy, happy. So we're not interested. And so about every week after that, somebody would say, well, when are we going to start a church? And we were just like, what is going on here? Because it was the furthest thing from our mind. We had our first church service at 10:30 in the cafeteria. And we started out on Sunday mornings at 10:30 service, and we continued on with Sunday night at 6 o'clock. And we had 19 people that very first service. And we thought we were just in hog heaven. We thought it was fantastic. 19 people in the cafeteria, all praising the Lord, giving God the glory. And we took up our first collection that Sunday. In fact, we didn't take past the pound. We had an offering box just like we do now. And I think we took in like $486 that day. And we were like, hallelujah. We can pay this $15, or at that time they raised it to $25 a week because of we had Sunday morning and Sunday night. So we can pay the rent, and we can start saving back for what God's going to do. And so we began meeting every Sunday. In January 2005, we began Sunday school. And so how do we do that? Well, we set up tables and chairs in the hallway of the school. And so every so many feet, there was the beginner's class. So many feet, there was the elementary class. So many feet, there was the junior high class. So many feet, there was the high school class. And then the adults met in the cafeteria from 9:30 to 10:30. Then we had worship service at 10:30. And so we had Sunday school going on too. Boy, we thought we were really rolling in high cotton. And we just began to pray and ask God, and we began to claim that we were going to have a facility debt-free, that God was going to take us to a place, move us out of that cafeteria, and take us to a place debt-free. And so with that said, another thing that God stirred us to do, which is also a New Life Church of Faith trait, if you will, is that we didn't pass the plate. We continued to leave the offering box out. We encouraged the people to operate under Malachi chapter 3 with the tithes and the offerings and bring those to the storehouse of the Lord and trust that what the Word says, that God will pour you out a blessing that you will not be able to hold. And we began to declare that for our church and for our people. And we made the decision that if we're asking the people of the church to abide by that, then the church needs to be the example of that. And since we are non-denominational, we're not affiliated with any denomination. We are still, and I say loosely affiliated with New Life Church of Faith Danville, and they also have a location in Urbana as well in Lincoln Square Mall. And when I say loosely affiliated, it means that, you know, we don't have like a district superintendent. Pastor Miller's not the district superintendent. We don't have a bishop. We operate independently, but yet we operate together in terms of sharing what God has done, and if there's something that we need to share with each other, we do, but we don't pay conference support to them like a denomination or anything like that. So we decided that if the people were asked to pay 10%, then the church needs to live by that 10% rule as well. So from day one, we began to tithe 10% of everything we took in, the church took in every week. We would tithe 10% off of that gross, right back out to other ministries, specifically to other ministries. And we did that from day one. And so the church operated out of the 90%, and we were constantly sending money to other ministries every week, practicing that tithe and offering and believing that God would bless us with our own facility one day. And I don't know how many of you here tonight know it, but the church sits on 3 acres, but the church owns the whole 20 acres corner here. Like June or July of 2009, I got wind that they were going to sell this property. So I called these guys, Denny and Dave, and I said, hey, you know, here's who I am, and here's who we are, and here's what we're doing, and went through all of it. And I said, would you sell us 5 acres out of that 20? They said, no, if you don't want the 20, we're not selling you the 5. You got to buy all 20. And I was just like, you know, we had the money for 20 acres. They were asking at that time $6,500 an acre for this 20 acres. And we had the money. We could have written the check, but it would have depleted us to where to start the project of the church, we'd have had all the money in the land, or most of the money in the land. So it just didn't make good sense. I mean, we'd have owned land, and then we had, again, been sitting in the cafeteria owning 20 acres, nowhere to go. So we just like, you know, we waited on the Lord, and God said, no, hold up. So we just kind of really wrote this off as well because it wasn't prime territory. You know, here it is on the southwest of town. It's not on any of the main roads. It's on the end of Crittenden Street. Who's going to find us? Who's going to get here? So on and so forth. So we just kept looking and kept praying. And in November of 2009, God told me one day to come out here and walk this property. And so at that time, I was still working full time, but I worked it out with my boss so I could take Wednesdays off. So every Wednesday was my ministry day. And so one of those Wednesdays in November of 2009, God said, come out and walk this property. And so I began to come out, and I drove. I was just like, why am I walking this property? And so I got out of my truck, and I took a couple steps, and I heard God say, this is your ground. And I was like, this isn't our ground. This makes no sense. He said, walk. So I began to walk. And as I began to walk, then I began to praise, and I began to just feel God's presence. And so I talked to the trustees, and they were kind of, you know, yeah, but it's not what we wanted. It's not what, you know, it's off the main road. I mean, it didn't fit any picture of anything that we thought we wanted. But we decided to go ahead and approach it. And so I'm going to start getting to the blessing parts now. So we waited. We held up through Christmas. We waited after the New Year. And I think it was around February, maybe March. They finally put a sign out on the property and said for sale. And I heard God say, you better move on this because they're getting serious. you're asking $6,500 and you won't sell anything less than 20 acres. He said, yes. I said, well, we're interested in that property, and we believe God wants it. I'm going to tell him about everything I told you, only I condensed it down a little bit more. And told me about our ministry and what we were doing, and that we were going to do everything debt-free, that we were trusting the tithe and the offering, and that what God has done for us in the meantime, as I told you before, we continue to accumulate cash. And we continue to operate it out by that one tithe and one offering a week. And there were times we would get word that other churches were building property. We even got word of it. If you remember, there was a big storm went down through Alabama back about 2009 or so, somewhere around in there. We found out, we saw a man's name on the news, called information, got his name because he said his church was destroyed in that tornado, and he was under the communion table in that church on a Saturday, and he came out without a scratch, but his church was flattened. And so we felt we were supposed to send seed, if you will, ministry money down to that church. They got their church built like 2 years before ours. And that, again, I wasn't happy with God on that one. I got to be honest, guys. Like, now, God, this is not right. You know, they got their church rebuilt in 2 years. Here we are. Now, at that time, we were at the funeral home because we had to vacate. And we haven't got our church done yet. He just said, wait. I'm going to take care of it. So anyhow, I sat with Dave and I said, you're asking $6,500. I said, the trustees and I are willing today to offer you $5,000 an acre, and we can close tomorrow. And his jaw dropped to the floor. He goes, what do you mean close tomorrow? I said, we've got the cash. I said, we don't have to go to the bank. We're not pre-approved at the bank because we've got the cash. We are ready to write you a check for $100,000 for that 20 acres. And being a businessman, and they were both getting ready to retire, and they were tired of waiting on the sewers, getting here and wanted to get rid of this property. You could tell he was really thinking, and he was thinking hard. And he got Denny on the phone, and he says, I'm sitting here, and they're offering us $100,000 cash. And he went in another room because I could hear him talking. And he come back out, and he says, well, he says, we're not ready to accept that today, but he said, can we think about this? And I said, sure. I said, you know, here's where we're at. If God's got that for us, he's got it for us. If it's not for us, I said, we've had heard God say no before, and we know God's got something for us. I said, but if this is for us, it's for us. He says, I'll be back to you within 24 hours. I said, be fine. So he left. And I, you know, again, being background in business as well, he didn't have a very good poker face. I was like, we're going to get this property. Because I know business, and that $100,000 was talking to that man. In the meantime, he had told me also that his father was a retired United Methodist minister. And as I told him how God had blessed us and got us to this point, and at that time we had $100,000 to write for the property, and I think I was still going to leave us like $150,000 left over to start the building. And I told him, you know, what kind of money we had and how it came about. And he was like, and you never did a fundraiser? I said, no. He said, you never passed the plate? I said, no. He said, you didn't have any kind of a special service? I said, no. I said, all we did was tell people to put their, just like we do now, put your tithes and offerings in the box and trust God. And we left it at that. And he said, and you guys got that kind of money? And he says, how many people you got in your church? I said, about 40. And he goes, then he said, how many millionaires? I said, none. I said, you come to our church, you're going to find everyday working people. And I said, not that we wouldn't accept a millionaire, but I said, you're going to find everyday working class people that just trust in the Lord. So he leaves, and 2 hours later he calls my cell phone. And he says, Pastor Greer, something strange has happened. He said, we haven't had one person interested in that property until today. He said, as soon as I walked out the door, he says, I got a phone call from a guy in Indiana that said that he is interested at full price in taking this property, and he's going to come over and look at it tomorrow. And he's pretty much assured me that if it's what he thinks it is, he's going to take it. And he said, when I hung up from him, he said, do you know such and such from Homer, Farmers from Homer? He said the name. And I said, yeah, I do. He said, well, they're interested. They've also said. He said, I'm telling you, within boom, these two calls, he said, they told me that they were interested at full price because they own property close. And he says, I really need time to explore these. And I said, you know what? As a businessman, I understand. I said, we're offering you less than what you're asking, and you're offering full price. I said, again, I was going to tell you, Dave, how we operate. If God's got that for us, we'll have it. He said, okay. So I waited on him, and he called me, I think it was almost a week or a little less than a week later, somewhere around in there. He said, Pastor Greer, a strange thing has happened. He said, you know that guy from Indiana that called me? And I said, yeah. He says, I tried to call that number back, and it just rings and rings and rings. He says, I can't find that man anywhere. I said, really? He said, another strange thing has happened. He says, you said you knew so-and-so. And I said, yeah. And he says, are they mean-tempered people? I said, not by any means. I've known them most of my life. And I said, they're pretty easygoing people. He said, well, whenever I called him back, because I couldn't get a hold of the guy at the Indiana, I called him back. And he said he made a request that him and his brother wanted to buy this property, but they wanted us to divide the property 10 and 10. And he said, I told him that we weren't going to put any more money into the property. If they wanted, they could buy the 20 and divide it themselves. And he said, he got very mad at me. He didn't cuss at him, but he said he got very mad at me and hung up on me. He said, I tried to call him back, and he told me in no so uncertain terms he was no longer interested in that property. I said, well, Dave, praise the Lord. I said, God does work. He said, so we would like to talk to you a little further. So we sit down again, and he says, we can't take the $5,000 an acre offer. And they were making a little money, which is, we knew what they'd given the auction years before, which didn't matter, you know, what we were willing to give. He says, can we work something out? And I said, well, yeah, what do you have in mind? He said, well, we could go 6,000 an acre. And I said, we're not going to do that. I said, but what we would be interested in doing is maybe coming up to $5,500 an acre, and then you get a fair appraisal on that property, and if there's any difference above and beyond $5,500 an acre that they fairly appraise it at, then we'll give you a tax write-off for the difference. So that way, it might save you some capital gains tax. And being a businessman, he was like, now you're talking my language. Because you can save you some tax money and put more net in my pocket, now you got my attention. And it's all legal to do that. So he said, I need to talk to my partner. He called me back a couple days later, and he says, we can't do it at the $5,500 amount, even with the tax write-off to get what we need to get, where we need to be. He says, would you go $5,800 an acre? No, he didn't say that. He said, 6,000 is the best we can do with the tax write-off. I said, no, we're not going to do that. I said, evidently it's not for us. And so I hung up. You know, I didn't hang up mad. I just parted. I said, it's not for us, so thanks a lot for your time, and we parted. And he called me back a couple hours. He said, well, now, we got to work this out somehow. And I said, okay. I said, here's the deal. I said, I talked to the trustees in the meantime on the phone, and I said, we'll go $5,800 an acre in the same deal. But I said, that's it. We are done. I said, if you can't do $5,800 cash, and then, you know, if there's a difference more, take that as a gifting. I said, then we're done. Don't even call me back. I said, there's no sense. I said, we know where we stand and where we are. $5,800 will still allow us to get our building started, and that's where it's got to be. And so if it's not, it's okay. We'll still be happy in the funeral home, and because we moved there by then, and we'll still be, you know, we'll be happy there, and we'll go on. And so he called back, you know, a day later, and he says, it's yours. And so then we, you know, had to start on a building. And so that was in March of 2010. And so we laid out a floor plan. And so we started getting bids on a building. And so we called three people. We called Illini FS, we called Morton Buildings, and we called Graber Builders out of Sullivan, Illinois. Because those are the three we had good references on. And we told them what we wanted was a 50 by 200 building shell. None of the inside done. We want the exterior done, all the windows, all the exterior doors. We want the ceiling and the walls, the exterior walls drywall ready. We'll take care of finishing the inside. So basically, we were talking about a machine shed with the walls studded in for drywall, ready for insulation, and a concrete floor. So I met with Illini FS, I met with Morton, I met with Grabers. We went all this over with the trustees and so forth after I meet with them. First bid came back from Illini FS, and it was $204,000. And I looked at that bid and I was like, okay, God, you got two more chances. Morton Buildings came in, and it was $210,000. I said, God, you got to do something. And you got to do something now. Because this is not working. but I really believe, you know, that you dropped in my spirit about $125,000. And so on a Saturday morning, I opened up my email, and Graber Buildings had a proposal. And I was very excited to open it, but also apprehensive because I was just like, okay, 204, 210, where's this one going to be at? Because I'd always heard they were the highest price because they were the best quality. So I open it up, and it says $149,000. $60,000 difference from the 210. And I was, hallelujah, you know, $449,000. And they wanted to put it on a foundation where everybody, the other two wanted to put it on a floating slab. And they were willing to do a poured wall foundation, which this church sets on, which makes the church even more valuable, which takes more concrete, which makes sense it would be higher than the other two, but it wasn't. So I was excited. I said, okay, because I'm a negotiator too. I thought, 125,000 is coming. So I see 149, we can work with that. So I was excited. I began to call and tell, and I was thinking, Lord, please let this not be a mistake. 2 hours later, I get another email, and the heading from Graber Buildings said, sorry, revised quote. Oh, ye of little faith. So I opened it up, and it said 140,000. He said, Pastor Greer, I'm sorry, I forgot you were tax exempt. By the time we took the sales tax off, it is now $140,000 for the building. Hallelujah! So we met with Noah from Graber's Building, and met with the trustees and that night. And I embarrassed my trustees because I worked Noah every way I could to get him down to $125,000. And Noah Kaufman was his name. Nice young Mennonite man. And he says, Pastor, he says, I got to be honest with you. He says, we give you every consideration because you are a church. He says, this is it. And it was a good deal. Because I checked with some others. We were talking about $14 a square foot, which is unheard of. And we had checked with some other developers and some developer friends of mine. They said, if you don't take that, you're foolish. And we had the money. So we wrote them the deposit check, and they started breaking ground in November of 2010 on this building. In April of 2000, and so we were blessed. $60,000 swing. Hallelujah. Everything debt free. You know, we were still debt free. Still debt free, and still had, you know, big. By that time, we had accumulated more. We had still over $100,000 in the bank after we had paid for the property, had paid for this initial building, and we were rolling, you know, and we were still about 45 people meeting the half-year-old. And so we started in April of 2011, finishing the inside, and to save money, we did 85% of what you see was all done by people of the church or people of the community that did come out. Most of them was people of the church. And so every Saturday, few nights, but most Saturdays, starting at 9 o'clock, we were down here swinging hammers and slinging mud and everything else. And we started in April of 2011. And as we would go along, God just continued to, like He was blessing us through the building and the property. He was blessing us on materials. Every time we go get a load, there's 488 sheets of 4x12 5-inch drywall in this building. I know because I think probably half a dozen of us hung every one of those 488 sheets. Thank God Oshie didn't show up because we were using a furnace ductwork lift as a drywall jack for the ceiling, strapped with 2 rolls of insulation that we were cranking it up, and it was going back and forth like we stand back, put it up, and zip, 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 zip. And God blessed us. And every time we go get a load of drywall, we buy a load 150, 175 sheets at a time. It kept going down in price. Our first load was like $9 a sheet. The last load we bought was like $6.75 a sheet. Every time we would go to Lowe's to buy some materials, it would be at a discounted rate. The light fixtures that you see in the sanctuary in there. Another church in Alabama was changing their lighting. They had those on the usedchurchfurniture.com. And I can't remember who all went, but there were several from the church that went down and picked up those lights, and we bought them for pennies on the dollar, and they're just like brand new. When we got ready to paint this interior, we were thinking we were going to roll all this ourselves, and God said, you ain't going to roll all this yourself. And so we found a guy who was a painter And in Danville, had a good reputation. In fact, some of you might know Dean's Paint and Wallpaper. His dad owned that. And Dave Maurer was his name. That was his son. He was needing some work. So he come down here, and he looked, and he says, we can, again, we had the money. And he said, I can paint this whole interior for $12,000. And I said, I'll get back with you. And, everybody was going, you need to do that. We don't have to roll, and stuff. So I called him back and I said, Dave, if you do it for $10,500, you can have the job. He says, I'll take it. So God blessed us again financially. Hooked up with a young man named Jake Freeman from Freeman Contractors to help do some finishing work. And he was a blessing. And he just, every time we turned around, God kept lowering the price on stuff. From the chairs you see to the carpeting was a $10,000 swing. We had one bid of $40,000. God led us to a Christian couple in Danville that just opened their carpet store. And we went there and told them what we were doing. They came down, looked, and their bid was $10,000 less. And for the same stuff. That was God. Ameren SoCo. So they come out, okay? And of course the city limits, even though this was annexed into the city for gas and water and sewer, and let me just say this, a funny thing happened right after we bought this property, the sewer started in Homer. Miraculously, the state had some money, miraculously Homer got a low interest loan from the state, and as soon as we signed, it wasn't but a couple months later, Homer announced and said, we're starting the sewer project that the other developers had waited all those years to do and couldn't get it done. And when we signed the dotted line, here come the sewers. I told the mayor that too. I said, you ought to thank God we're here because we got your sewer system rolling. And where's that? What did you just say? Ameren. Okay, so Ameren. So we called Ameren out. And of course, this is all undeveloped property. And we said, what's it going to take? So they were quoting some, hook up to the gas, and they were going to come so far on their own, and then we'd have to pay the rest of the distance for the electrical and the natural gas. And what was it? Was it $3,000 for the gas hookup? I can't remember the exact number.
I can't remember the exact number either.
I think it was something like $3,000 it was going to take from us to get from where they stopped to where we needed to be. And we were like, man, is there anything else we can do? And they were like, no, that is what it is. So we checked around to make sure they were telling us the truth, and they were. And so we wrote them the check on deposit. And so whenever they come out, the day that they come out to begin to work on that, to begin to bore everything through, I got a call from the engineer of Ameren I've been working with. He says, Pastor Greer, he says, I got to tell you something. He said, we run into a little bit of a snag out here on this gas hookup. Of course, again, oh, ye a little faith. I'm thinking, okay, how much more money is he going to ask for? He says, the funny thing is the gas main is closer to your property than what was originally shown on our plat map, and even closer than when we originally came out here several months ago and marked where it was at because we knew where it was at. He said, but now it's closer, and he says, we'll be sending you a check. Was it $1,200 or $1,200? Yeah, 12. What's it? 15. It was $1,200, $1,500. It was $1,200 or $1,500 right there. He said, we'll be sending you a refund check back for $1,200 or $1,500 because it is closer than what we originally expected. And I said, hallelujah, because I could just see Jesus taking that little gas line. I got to help this church. I really believe that. I know it sounds funny, but I believe that. God had to do something because they had it marked, signed, sealed, delivered. They knew where that main ended and where we were going to have to pick up at. And all of a sudden, he says, I can't even explain it. He says, I don't know how it got that close. I said, I can. His name is Jesus. And he just, Jim Ippolito was his name. He just kind of, okay, humored the pastor a little bit. But I tell you all things like that to tell you how God has blessed this ministry all the way along on every hand. And not to brag on the ministry, but to brag on God. Over and over again. Every time we have run into something, and even times we would get held up on things, or there would be something going on when we were working on this, and we'd have to stand back and we're like, okay, what are we going to do now? God would either help us figure it out, or He'd make a provision, or He'd bring a supply. And again, we just continued to tithe. back out to other ministries, as we still do today. We continue to send money out. You know, I think I figured out one year that we at that point of our ministry, from where we started in 2004 to that point, that we had tithed back out something like $50,000 back out to other ministries over those years. You know, and even I got to admit, you know, in my mind it crossed for a second. I'm like, boy, you know, if I had that 50,000, we could have gone ahead and done this then. But it wasn't for us to have, because that would have been robbing God. And God was honoring the faithfulness of the people and the faithfulness of this ministry to trust Him. Because it took a lot of faith for 40 people, 19 people that first Sunday, eventually 40, 45 people, to step out and buy 20 acres on the southwest corner of town, to trust God for debt-free. Because I got to admit, whenever I started talking a lot of this debt-free, because again, I believe the church ought to be an example of debt-free if we believe for people to lead debt-free lives. Mm-hmm. And from the beginning, when I started talking about we need to be debt-free, there was some of them looking at me kind of like, well, that sounds good, Pastor, but I don't know we can do that. God can. And He has, and He does, and He continues to do so. And so over and over again, those kinds of blessings, financial blessings, and even there'd be times we go to the mailbox and somebody from not even close to here would say, we heard about what you're doing and how you're trusting God. And here's $500. Here's $1,000. I think one time we did get a check for $3,000 or $4,000 from somebody. And they said, we just heard about it. There was a 2-foot drop, because this property, if you even step out on this property, you'll see this is one of the highest points, and then it all drains away. From the east end of the building to the west end of the building, it was a 2-foot drop. It was level out here, but it was a 2-foot drop off on the grade, which means we were going to have a lot of fill dirt here to get it up to where you see it today around here. Well, again, like I said, it so happened that the sewer started at the same time that we bought this property, and so they needed somewhere to haul some fill, some good base clay. And they were hauling it 3 miles out of town to dump it. And so one of the people here at church, I think it was Shane Rogers, matter of fact, had a friend who was a foreman on the job, and he went to him and he said, would you like to dump some fill on the property? He said, man, that would save us time, save us money, and fuel. He said, I'll give you all the fill you want, just show me where you want to put it. He said, we'll haul it there, dump it, we'll charge you a dime for anything, no transportation or nothing. We were even willing to pay their fuel just to drive. He said, no, this is a blessing. We said, this is a blessing to us. And they began to put piles of clay all over. I can't remember how many loads we counted up, but we figured out it was about $10,000 worth of fill that they gave us. That was God. Then we got ready to put the first round parking lot in, and we had the gravel hauled in, and the rock quarry out here rolled their rates back to like 3 years previous, and they gave us a deal that was half price on road pack. Which was just huge and phenomenal, because they give us another deal whenever there's another one. You know, this underneath this building, there's 1,000 ton of fill because of the grade to get the concrete where it's at. 1,000 ton. And the rock quarry out here, Fairmount Rock Quarry, again, another Christian lady that's been there for a lot of years. She talked to the higher ups, worked there, and we happened to know her. We used to go to church with her, and they gave us half price fill. Then another gentleman here in town that has a trucking company, he wanted to do something very special for us, and he hauled every bit of that 1,000 ton, didn't charge us one dime. No fuel, no labor, no nothing. Hauled 1,000 ton of gravel, didn't charge us one dime. When we got ready to put the parking lot in, that same gentleman didn't charge us one dime to haul, I can't remember how many ton of road pack, a bunch. He didn't charge us one dime. That was God. You know, we didn't beg him. We didn't ask him. He come to us and said, I want to do something special to bless you. I see what you're doing in town, and so I want to bless you. That was God laying it upon his heart. So that happened with the clay. That happened with the road pack. When we got ready to spread this dirt, all this fill out, we called one guy, and he said it was going to be like $8,000 just to spread all the dirt and the gravel. And so I was like, $8,000, Lord, you know. We got it. I don't want to pay it. So again, I said, God, you got to do something. And so I just so happened that the guy I worked for at the body shop, he had a friend who, now their family, Billy Johnson and Melissa Johnson, his mother Sally Johnson, his dad Ernest Johnson, who just got saved back last fall, little Chloe, they now come here. They're part of this ministry. But I met him through the guy I work for. So I called Billy up and I told him who I was. He said, yeah, I remember you. I said, come out, I need you to look at this. And he came out and looked at it, and I said, I've told everybody we dealt with, I've told them all the same thing. Any contractor, I said, look, one thing I personally dislike is a begging church. I don't think God's people need to beg. If we trust God, we don't have to beg. Number two, we're not asking you to treat us any different than anybody else, but we are asking you to give us every consideration that you would give to anybody else. That's how I've always told them. I've never twisted anybody's arm and say, well, we're a church now. You need to give us this. We're a church now. You need to cut this. I've always told them those three things because I didn't want any, one, didn't want a reputation of us being a begging church. Number two, it's just something I just don't believe that God's people ought to do. It'd be a begging ministry. And so I called Billy up and I said, told him all that. He come out, he says, he looked around and he says, I can do that for $1,700. I said, really? I said, when do you want to start? He said, I'll be out here next Saturday. Took him like a half a day. He spread all the dirt, got the gravel in, took care of all of that. So, and when he's all done, I said, well, let's go over to the truck. I'll write you a check. Oh, you going to pay today? And I said, yeah. He goes, we'll make it $1,600 then. Because you're paying today. Thank you, Lord. Again, things like that happening over and over again with provision, time and time again. And again, we just kept being faithful to bless others and knowing God would bless us back. When we bought this property in March of 2010, about 3 weeks after we bought the property, it was a Sunday morning about 7:30, and the phone rang at home. And Debbie come and got me, and she said, there's a lady on the line, and her name is Colleen Shields. You know Colleen, is part of your family.
Yeah.
And Colleen Shields, and she's a part of the family that used to own this property before the developers. For those of you that don't know, before 2002, this was Clem ground. 20 acres is owned by the Clem family. I believe it was Ed's uncle, if I remember correctly, that farmed and owned this property. And he passed, if I understand when he passed, and they sold it at auction. Am I correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, I'm thinking that's correct. Ed had continued to farm this property on cash rent, not only for the family, but then for the developers, and then we kept him on as well. Decided to keep him on as well. There's no reason not to. And plus, there were, we had known Ed for about 30 years, personally. And the other thing was, it was formerly his family's ground, and there was a tie there. And we thought it was important to leave him in place there. And at that time, Ed was not too committed to the Lord. And so there's another alternative motive there, too, that we were kind of hoping that maybe we could get him into church one day. And he had made a bold, brash statement to Stephanie that said he would go to church one day whenever he could walk out his front door and see his church. Well, if you look across the field right now, about the second house over is where Ed and Stephanie Clem live. Very much asked. So Colleen calls, and she sounds distraught on the phone, and Debbie gets me, and she goes, she needs to talk to you. And I'm thinking, again, O.E. little faith. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we did all kinds of title searches. What is wrong? Somebody is going to lay claim to that property out of the family. We're going to have a problem. So, as calm as I could be, I said, hello, this is Pastor Greer. And she's crying. And she said, Pastor Greer, this is Colleen Shields. She said, we just found out from David, because Dave lived in St. Joe, and she knew David. I can't remember his last name. I wish I could. But Olmsted, is that right? Dennis Olmsted. But it was, and David, I can't remember. I'm sorry. She said, we just talked to David yesterday, and he told us he sold the property and he sold it to your church. And she says, I just want you to know that we are so excited as a family to find out that there's going to be a church on that property. She says, we couldn't be happier. And I thought, okay, that's the extent of it. That's great. I'm glad you're happy. Thank you. She goes, no. She goes, I got to tell you the rest of it. It was Colleen's dad that used to own this property. And she goes, when I was a little girl, my dad used to drive by that property and he would say, Colleen, there's going to be a church on that property one day. I just know it. And they were, if I remember right, part of the United Methodist Church in Homer. And the only reason they got to the United Methodist Church, this is back in the day, a long time ago, only reason they ended up there, not that it's, a bad church or anything like that, They got there because she said it was, he was afraid to cross the railroad tracks with the kids to go to the other churches on the other side of the tracks. So he decided to take his children to the home United. He's a longtime United Methodist. He said, but he would always tell me, Colleen, there's going to be someday, he said, he would tell all of us kids, there's going to be a church on that property one day. And she goes, he used to sit on the porch of the house, and she was out of the blue. He would say, you know, I can't wait to see that church. It's going to be on that 20 acres out there someday. And he said, he was very distraught back in 96, 97, whenever the Church of Christ bought property out here on the east side of town to build a church, because she said, if they would have come and asked him for this 20 acres, he had already decided he was going to give this property to them. But nobody came to talk to him about this 20 acres. And he was very distraught because he was like, I thought that's where there's going to be a church. She said, he died without seeing a church, except for today. And she said, we are so glad because my daddy from heaven is going to be able to see a church on that 20 acres. And we wish you the best, and we're praying for the best, and we're believing that God is going to do some great things for your church on that 20 acres. And of course, by now, I'm just like, God, you are just too much. And I think that Sunday morning, if I remember right, I shared that while at that time, it was before we moved to the film, we were still at the cafeteria. Of course, there wasn't a dry on the place. And of course, praises went up. And we knew where we were supposed to be. This little 20 acres, and we thought, who wants to come here, off the beaten path? Nobody's going to see. How are we going to get them here? You know, God finally, that day, it finally got through all of us. This is where we're supposed to be. And this is holy ground. And so Pastor Marsh, whenever we would be, you know, many of you, Pastor Marsh is the retired pastor that sits on the front row, inside aisle, usually weeps or shouts during the service. Strong, powerful man of God. The very first, not the first Saturday we worked, but a few Saturdays after we started working, he showed up one Saturday and he walked in the door. And he took 2 steps back and he goes, the presence of God is in this place. And he walked as fast as he could to that end of the building. There was no stage there or nothing at that time. And he kneeled down on his knees and he began to pray. And very regularly, from that point on any given Saturday while we were out here working, Pastor Marsh would show up about 10 o'clock. And he'd walk in the door and he said, the presence of God is in this place. And he'd walk right up there to that east end and he would pray, clear till we were done. He recognized the presence of God right away. At that time, him and Sister Marsh weren't here. They hadn't even heard that story, if I remember correctly. They were still in the church before their church closed. And so again, this ground, you know, and I only boast in the Lord, it is anointed ground. It is blessed ground. Ed Clem will tell you today that this continues to be the best producing crops that he has in the acreage that he farms. Last year, it was record-setting what this corn did on this 20 acres. And it's because of the presence of God. It's not because of anything else, but it's the presence of God. It is a blessed ground. So we know God is going to use it and God's in it. And we're just thankful to be able to be the vessels to be here, because it didn't have to be us. But God chose us. And I'm thankful that he did. And we are very, very thankful for all that he continues.